Geeks, geekettes, cats, and kittens. It's Wednesday morning. Time once again for Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me about what I do for a living. What I do for a living is I write comic books. Yep, it's your inside man, your comic book pal, here to get real about the comic book medium. And while I got your attention, follow the link here in comments and go over to SpinRack.io and sign up and get your own exclusive, one of a kind, to you anyway, wallpaper for your smartphone with artwork by the fabulous Graham Nolan. You can't get anywhere else. Sign up for SpinRack, find out what we're up to. Working in gaming, metaverse, digital comics, physical merchandise, all kinds of crazy stuff. You're going to want to check it out. You're going to want to get on the ground floor. Great things are coming. Okay, first question. Ophi asks, "Hi Chuck, do you ever read or look into fan fiction? Any you've liked? And how possible do you think it is for a creator to break into the comic industry doing fan fiction? You're the man as always. Thank you." Well, you're very, very welcome. But I don't know how I can be the man when you're the man. Ophi. I'm not assuming your gender. Fan fiction is what it is. It's stories made up by people who don't have any right to make them up, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Apparently DC and Marvel haven't found it actionable. And I can't imagine how much Star Trek fan fiction there is out there. It could probably fill the Library of Congress 3 times over. Fan fiction is what it is. I mean, it's got no gatekeepers. It's got no guardrails. And, I guess it's a place where imagination runs free. I've never really checked it out, except in, a couple of instances in the 90s, in the dawn of the internet age, when the supply of fan fiction was not yet slopping over. How possible is it to get work? Well, I don't know how many of the current comic writers today started out in fan fiction, but I do know of one, Devin Grayson, who wrote quite a bit of Batman material and wrote for Marvel as well, started writing fan fiction in the 90s, which he somehow got into the hands of Denny O'Neil and the Bat staff. And they liked what they saw and contacted her. And, the rest is history. Devin had quite a career on some high-profile books and crossovers and things like that. And her own creations as well. And so it is possible. And like I said, I don't know how many of the people currently writing may have started in fan fiction. It seems like a kind of a fun playground. It's nothing I probably would have ever been interested in. I wanted to go right to professional writing. So I concentrated more on that. But, if you're just goofing around, having fun, it's what I do for a living. So I can see why people would want to do it. Gentle Savage, he asks, "Mr. Dixon, have you played any of the games in Batman Arkham franchise? If so, which one do you like the most? And what do you think of their interpretation of Batman and his rogues gallery?" Well, I mean, I've never played them. I'm not much of a gamer. I'm still playing Caesar 3. It's the only game that I occasionally look in on. It's like decades old. So I don't even think it's from this century. But I gotta say, the imagery on these games is astounding. And I know that the creators pay a lot of attention to continuity, try to stay true to the characters and all the rest of it. But you can't argue this game looks amazing, absolutely amazing. And of course, I've seen it animated. I've seen cut scenes from it, and it's cool stuff. There's a lot in it, and it's been the successive Batman games have been extraordinarily successful. And of course, Batman as a character with his rogues gallery and the environment of Gotham and the environment of Arkham Asylum just lend themselves to this kind of punch 'em up fighting game. So it's all been pretty cool. And I do like, personally, I love the different interpretations they have for Bane. Before Dark Knight Rises, the Arkham Asylum games turned Bane into a household name amongst gamers. And it's always gratifying when I hear from gamers that they find Bane terrifying in the game, that he's frightening, he's difficult to to get past. He's difficult to defeat. One guy told me him and his son spent 2 weeks trying to take Bane down, and that all makes me feel good. The other thing that makes me feel good is it's a direct licensing deal from DC that doesn't involve Warner's, and so Graham Nolan and I see a let's say a fairer distribution of funds from the games than we do from movies and TV and things like that. So I'm a big fan of the games and Lego. Hey, it's a Gentle Savage twin spin. Gentle Savage gets another shot at the Ask Chuck Dixon Thunderdome here. Are you a fan of Ninja Turtles at all? If so, have you read and got any thoughts on the last Ronin storyline? Also, if Bane had a first name, what would it be? It'd probably be Bane. Yeah, I've never ever thought about what Bane's real name might have been because no one knows it. I would have to invent one. He would have to invent one. Maybe Eduardo. Ninja Turtles. My good buddy Frank Fosco has been doing absolutely amazing work on Ninja Turtles recently. Was I a fan? No. Am I an admirer? Yes. There's a difference. I love what Eastman and Laird did. They did their own thing. People tend to forget this started out as a spoof of Daredevil comics at the time, Frank Miller's run, and evolved into a hugely successful franchise. And these guys did it on their own, and they never gave up. They pushed and pushed. They went to every publisher with this. Tom DeFalco told me, he confessed to me that he turned them down 3 times for publication at Marvel. And so they put the bucks together and they did it themselves. They were really the first guys doing this kind of thing with their own creation, independently publishing their own creation. Yes, I know Jan and Dean Mulaney created the graphic novel, the American graphic novel, but they didn't do the art and story. These guys came out and did it all themselves. And I met them at a number of cons. I mean, in Maine, in Long Island. I mean, you would run into these guys everywhere. I don't think there was a con they weren't doing. They really put in the homework. They really put in the labor to push this over the top. And I was fortunate enough to meet the guy who would become their agent, who got them their animation deal, their toy deal, and everything else, which of course took this comic book favorite, this comic book phenom, and turned it into a, pop culture dynasty, really. When you consider the toys, the games, the cartoons, as well as the comic books, and the movies, he got them their first movie deal. It's a hell of a story. These guys did well, and sort of led the way for the rest of us. Showed, hey, this can be done. You can do this outside the system. They created their own system, which, a lot of people are doing today. Graham Nolan, Eric July, Billy Tucci, Brian Pulido, your boy Zach, all out there doing their own thing. And it's cool. Now, was I a fan? I have kids, so I've seen a lot of Ninja Turtles, and I had to agree with Tom DeFalco at the time. I would have turned it down too. I didn't get it. I wasn't the right age. This came along when I was in my 30s, and I didn't see it. And in hindsight, I can see it 2020. What little boy wouldn't love this? There are 4 brothers. They hang out in the sewer. There's no real parental oversight other than that rat character they hang around with, but he's more of a cool, uncle than a parent. And they live in the sewer and they eat pizza and they learn how to fight with all these weapons. And they meet all these cool characters. And what little boy wouldn't be absolutely fascinated with this world? But I didn't see it at the time. I didn't see it. I didn't see what these guys saw. Eric Thomas, what is the best way to purchase Nightwing comics and graphic novels that you wrote? Thank you and have a great weekend. Like all of us, I mean, I'm a consumer of this stuff too. And if I want to find something published in the past, I hit Amazon, I hit eBay, I hit Thrift Books, Libris Books, Abe Books, the local comic shop. I pester the folks at Gmart. If you don't know about Gmart, it's a terrific comic subscription service. I've used them for over 20 years. They've never failed me. Even when I, want them to look for stuff that I can't find myself, they manage to dig it up. Terrific service. The stuff comes beautifully packed. Everything comes in mint condition. They are conscientious to a T, and they have everything, everything. And you order once a month and pay ahead of time. And, you know, well, you don't pay ahead of time. You pay as it comes in. And they're great at emailing you and letting you know when things are coming up about sales, when your shipments are going out, everything else. So that's it for Gmart from me. They're where I get my comics. But yeah, I mean, you know, you got to go everywhere. Just, you know, I wish I knew a place that had super cheap graphic novels. I think there is a website called Cheap Graphic Novels. You might want to look there first. So yeah, yard sales, garage sales, I don't know. But I just wanted to answer the question so I could talk about Gmart and also not ignore your question, because that would be rude. Jared Mitchell. Hey, Reverend. Within mainstream superhero comics, how should characters go through the aging process? Would it be better for readers to see the characters age up, or does there come a time when readers just need to age out? Comics, I've said this over and over again, and it breaks every adult comic fan's heart. I'm an adult comic book fan too, but you got to admit, things are created for kids. And the fact that we appreciate the nuances and different things about the comics that maybe kids wouldn't see, or maybe we just love these characters and stories so much as children, we can't let them go. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, comics you need to age out. You know, comics need to seek new generations. They need to seek new audiences. And it's really, really important. And comics don't do that anymore. Now, there's nothing wrong with adult comics. I've written adult comics. I've written R-rated comics, you know, and that's fine. And I don't think that the medium is immature. But when you're talking about people running around in you know, spandex and boots and capes and masks, leaping from rooftop to rooftop, this is a venue for children. These are childhood wish fulfillment fantasies that you can hang on to through your adolescence. And there's certainly the material, when it at its best is sophisticated enough to be entertaining to someone, you know, older. But you got to let it go for the next generation. You can't hoard these characters for yourself. I once told a fan, you can't keep aging these characters. I mean, what do you want to see Batman using a walker someday? And the guy says, "Oh, that's ridiculous." I said, "Well, you're saying this now, but maybe when you're 70, that you would relate to that." You know, so the biggest downfall of comics is they stopped relying on a turnover in audience, which they always used to rely on. If you look across the history of comics, every major publisher sort of reinvented itself every 5 or so years. And as they welcomed in a new generation of readers. And we stopped doing that about 30 years ago. And we see the end result, which is sales go down and down and down, and comics become more and more irrelevant as a segment of our pop culture, where once they were a vital part of our pop culture. Maybe not one that the public acknowledged, or that there was a lot of reportage about, or anybody really noticed. But in the secret world of children, comics were at the center of pop culture, and they are no longer. We've lost generations of readers who either have never read a comic or don't even know comics exist. And so, you know, all of you Superman, Spider-Man, and X-Men fans, it's like, just let it go. Let it go. And all of you publishers, think of fresh new approaches. Maybe a fresh crop of creators who actually know what they're doing. Distribution, all kinds of things to reach out and get kids to read them again. But for the most part, stop writing for 40-year-old fans and start writing for kids again. Leads us to a Jared Mitchell twin spin. He gets another shot at the Thunderdome. When classic characters have been published for 80 plus years, oftentimes in a shared universe, is there any way to prevent them from being bogged down by their own continuity? Well, kind of relates to the last question. You know, look, when I was a kid, this was the Superman cast. A couple of years later, it wasn't. Most of these characters were done away with. Why? Because a new generation of readers came in and washed all of the old continuity away. And this is what happens. You create this massive supporting cast and ancillary characters and everything else, and you leave some behind and new ones come along. It's it's what the newspaper strips did. The newspaper strips would evolve over time. There would be characters that you would be left to forget. But remember, newspaper strips appeal to adults as well. So they weren't as much in the generational business as comic books are, or children's books. Look at children's books. I used to write children's books, and we often said that of the top 10 children's book writers, 8 of them were dead. But kids didn't know that. Dr. Seuss would reach a new generation of readers every few years. And publishers relied on that. But comics turned their back on it. And so we end up with these 40-year-old dense continuities that no one can straighten out, nobody can figure out, huge casts of characters, subplots that go nowhere. It's like at some point you've got to like trim the fat, got to start over. And I don't mean a crisis or anything like that, because crises and reboots and blah, 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 they appeal to the older adult fan. You want to appeal to casual readers. So you've got to kind of get that mojo back and create stories that engage in their own right. And let's face it, maybe for some of these characters, they've been around too long. And maybe they've been reinvented and rebooted one too many times. And there just is no more gas left in the tank. And maybe they need to be like let loose, let go, retired, put out the pasture for a while. And who knows, 5-6 years down the road, you might have a creative team comes along and go, man, I got an awesome idea how we can bring back Captain Potato Salad. And all of a sudden, Captain Potato Salad is reintroduced to a brand new generation of readers who own that character. And that's another thing. I mean, when I was reading as a kid, I didn't feel like I owned Superman and Batman because I knew they were from another era. They were from generations before me. But I owned Spider-Man. Spider-Man came around when I was a kid. Fantastic Four, Hulk. These are I own these characters. They were my characters. Maybe we need new characters for the kids to associate with, that they feel are theirs. I mean, I was just talking about Ninja Turtles for guys and gals of a certain age. Ninja Turtles, they were their characters. They were their Ninja Turtles. These are our comics. These are our cartoons. And how long has it been since we've seen anything like that? A new franchise, a new set of characters, outside of like the very young set, with Paw Patrol and stuff like that. They're always introducing new characters for the younger kids because they know that those younger kids, they want something that's theirs. And I think comics need to think about that. But of course, among all the many, many things about the comic book business, thinking about new material and reaching out to new audiences and capturing the imagination of the young, it's just not on their agenda. They have other things that are much more important to do, like telling you not to buy their comics if you didn't vote for the people they liked. Stephen Hudler, when you write your novels, how many rounds of edits do you go through until you're satisfied it's the story you want readers to read? Do you hire beta readers to read over early drafts and give you feedback on them? My beta reader, I never thought of him that way. I call him my nitpicker in chief. Michael Hutchison, he reads all of my novels before I send them to the prospective publishers for their edits. And, I send him an Amazon gift card. I really don't hire him. I really should like pay him, not a salary, but maybe some sort of stipend each time he does it. But he's great at it. He enjoys it. It's an imposition to ask somebody to read something for you. That's why you have to hire beta readers. I mean, you can't ask a relative or a friend to read something for you, especially me, because I turn out so much stuff. It's an imposition. And people try to be nice. It's like, when you come home from school with your crayon drawing and show it to your mom so she can put it up on the refrigerator. Well, she's your mom. She has to put your ugly drawing up on the refrigerator. But you go to friends and associates and say, read my screenplay. You're really imposing on them, and they'll say, yeah, I'll get to it. And they mean it at the time. And I know this because I mean it when I say it. Read my comic script. Okay, I will. And I generally never do. Because I meant it. I meant to promise it. Well, I wasn't lying. I meant it. I just never seem to get around to it. But Hutch always gets around to it. He's awesome. And he finds typos where no man could ever find another typo. He's astounding. And I don't know what I'd do without him. And then, of course, it goes further down the apple sorter to editors and associate editors and readers that my publishers have. And they find more typos, but never as many as Hutch can find. Which is why I give him first blush. How many rewrites do I go through on a novel? I just sort of like build it. It's not like a comic script where I write it through and send it in. I don't do any rewriting generally, unless I've come up with a different idea or reason for the rewrite. But on novels, it's all rewriting. You don't write, you rewrite. And I go back and massage and polish. You're not supposed to go back to the beginning of your novels before you're done with them and begin polishing, but I can't resist. And a lot of times it gets me back into the story or reminds me, of subplots and character names and things like that I otherwise would forget. Sort of gets me back into the book. So yeah, it's a lot of rewriting, which I enjoy, actually. I don't like rewriting comics because it involves reformatting as well, moving panels around in pages. It's a pain to rewrite comics. But rewriting prose is fun. It's my favorite part of the process because the really hard work's been done. The wordage has been put down. Now, you got to burr the edges off it and correct stuff. So generally, if it takes me, I'm going to say roughly 2 months to write a novel, it takes me a week to rewrite it. I mean, steady every day, like 6 hours for a week to do the rewriting. But I enjoy it. It's a blast. Kane Dorr, number 1. These are all related. So, Kane, you don't get a twin spin. What was it like working for Wildstorm and Extreme Studios? It was kind of weird because it was all long distance. I knew Jim Lee. I met him when he was a young kid with a dream, trying to decide whether he wanted to be a high-paid surgeon or a high-paid comic book artist. And he would visit the Marvel offices, and a really nice guy. And, of course, his art was jaw-dropping. And revolutionary and all the rest. And it was Jim who reached out to me initially to do Team 7 and stuff like that. He welcomed me to join the Wildstorm universe, which was kind of weird for me because I didn't really like these comics. But they wanted me to write like their military backstories. And I remember Jim saying, you're like the Tom Clancy of comics, which I took as a compliment because he meant it as a compliment. So I was basically brought in because I could write believable military stuff, and they wanted that hard-edged, dark kind of story that I was doing at Punisher, on my Punisher books. And it was a lot of fun. They hooked me up with some great artists, and I had a good time. And, consequently, down the road, I would write Nightmare on Elm Street for them. I did a Grifter Midnighter crossover. Jim and I talked for a number of years about a Grifter Batman story. And I took a few shots at treatments and stuff like that, but it never panned out, never happened. But I liked working for them, but I wasn't like involved with the office or anything like that. I didn't have that close a relationship with any of those guys. Even more distant was working for Extreme. For whatever reason, I think because Jim Lee had hired me, Rob Liefeld wanted to hire me. I mean, I think Rob wanted whatever Jim and Todd had. So hired me. I did a little bit of work on Prophet. I didn't really care for the book. I thought it was way too pretentious. I had a lot of problems with it. And eventually, because they still wanted me involved, I turned to a buddy of mine, Steve Downs, and he began co-writing the stories with me, and eventually took them over entirely. And then they didn't like what he was doing. I think Steve got too pretentious even for them. I think Steve was too smart for them, and they didn't want him around anymore. But he was writing these like densely plotted stories that were, full of mind-blowing revelations and, so, Grant Morrison type stuff that I can't write. And I think that's what they were looking for on the Prophet title was. And then, of course, in a previous video, I went over the debacle over Captain America, Heroes Reborn. So continuing, we're going to call this Kane-Dor Investigates because he's got more questions on this subject. Very, very serious. Let's delve into more of the intrigues, actions, and reactions at the Image universe. Did you ever have a book of your own you wanted to publish under the banner? No. No, I didn't like the Image creator deal. Plus, they were an artist-driven company at the time, and they weren't really writer-driven. In a lot of cases, they were kind of hostile to writers. Some of the creators, not all the creators, were kind of hostile to writers. That whole, what's more important, the writing and the art controversy. Yeah, okay. What's more important in a goldfish bowl, the fish or the water? It's, I thought that was all silly. And I didn't like their creator-owned agreement. I didn't like their contract. It was too damn thick, and it had crazy wording in it that was all advantageous to Image and not as advantageous to the creator as I would have liked. The only thing I did do through Image, and it really wasn't my choice, was Across the Pond paid for and packaged the Iron Ghost miniseries, and when it came time to collect it, they decided to go through Image to do the collection, and I was not happy with the way the collection turned out. For trade dress, I wasn't happy with the cover, and especially wasn't happy with the indicia, which assigned the copyright to the wrong people. But in the original comics, the indicia is correct, so the copyright is secure. And when I contacted Image about this mistake in the indicia, their indifference was staggering. They really didn't care that the indicia was wrong. And it's like, if there's one thing you got to get right in a book, it's the author's name and who the work belongs to. But Iron Ghost remains in the copyright of myself and Flynn Henry and Sergio Cariello. So don't worry about that. Okay, another Kane-Dor question, and as Kane-Dor Investigates continues, do you have any insight whatsoever on Chris Claremont's Huntsman character that showed up in Cyberforce and Wildcats? He was included in what looked like the beginnings of a huge story arc, which appeared to be completely abandoned. Well, it was Chris Claremont. Chris abandoned more than one subplot in his time. Yeah, maybe he was going somewhere. No, I'm not familiar with this character. I didn't read these comics with any degree of regularity. I only learned enough that I needed to know to write the characters. I didn't really read these comics. So yeah, I can't really answer your question except, to make a joke at Chris's expense. Oh, we continue. One of the most frequent pieces of advice provided to writers is that the story's protagonist must change. By the end of the story, stories of the protagonist will have to be different somehow, affected by the events of the story and often learning a lesson. However, I do witness this change as often as the advice implies it should happen, if ever with some IPs. I do not witness this change. This rings true in comics as well. The different takes on Batman don't really change when the reader is only reviewing the issues that fall under that specific take on the character. So do our protagonists have to change in order for the consumer to feel they got their money's worth or not? I may have credited this question to the wrong person. If I have, I don't think this was a Kane-Dor question. If I have, please correct me in comments and I will make it up to you in the next video. What you're asking here is, once you've set a protagonist in motion, the hero of the story in motion, must he change? Must he have an arc? Must he learn lessons as he continues along his journey? And my answer to that is no. He doesn't have to. Obviously, he can, but he doesn't have to. You have iconic characters who arrive in the story, and they remain the same throughout. Now, they may become more bitter through experience. Obviously, they learn things about their environment and the challenges ahead of them and everything else. But if they started out brave and resolute and resourceful and, whatever, wherever their moral compass is set, that's where they should remain for the rest of the story in most stories. Now, some stories are about the character's arc, but in the kind of stories we're talking about, mainly genre stories, mainly action stories, you introduce the character and that's the way he is for the rest of the story because we've related to him in that form. I mean, did we want a kinder, gentler Captain Ahab? Did we want Captain Ahab to learn the futility of, of hunting for the great white whale? Ahab, what are you going to get out of this in the end? No, Ahab never learns and, goes to his doom. And would we have it any other way? Most Bogart movies, Bogart arrives, he's the same guy with the exception of Treasure Sierra Madre. And even then you could argue he's the same guy. He's the same guy at the end of the movie as he was at the beginning. And that's what's great about Bogart and other iconic characters is that they don't change, that their morals can't be compromised, that they're on a mission, they're heroic, they're brave, they're courageous, or they're cowardly and venal and, scheming. But, that with characters like this is the way you want them. And then you present challenges to them. You present challenges to their moral code and all the rest of it. But the characters that last, the characters that we love, the characters that we want to see again and again and again, don't really change. And they really shouldn't change because, once again, a new generation of readers might discover them, new generation of consumers to be entertained by these characters, and they want them pure. They want them the way they were before, not altered in any way. I mean, look what they've done to Bond. They've ruined Bond. I mean, if the last Bond movie was your first Bond movie, you're never going to watch another one. If you're a long-term Bond fan, you understand that your first Bond movie is almost always your favorite Bond movie because it's your introduction, James Bond, to this remorseless, cool, self-interested, sometimes boorish, often sexist male figure. This ultimate figure, this ultimate male fantasy figure. And they've taken him over the course of the last few films, climaxing with the most recent one, and they've explored his emotions. He's not the Grinch. He doesn't have to change. We don't want him to change. We want James Bond to be James Bond. We want Tarzan to be Tarzan. We want Wonder Woman to be Wonder Woman. We want these things to not be altered because it's about the story, not always the character, particularly in franchises like this. So, a weepy Bond is nothing anyone asked for, except people who don't like James Bond, who wanted to tear the franchise down, which I think successfully they have. We will hope they come to their senses when they recast James Bond with a new actor, and we get back to the kind of, crazy, wacky spy stories we used to have. But, who knows when that will be. Hey, what's you reading? I get this question all the time. What are you reading? What recent comics are you reading? Well, none. Been reading a lot of Lucky Luke recently. I reviewed that kind of soft Lucky Luke reboot, which I liked a whole lot. But I skipped back a bit. Cinebooks released one of the original Goscinny and Morris Lucky Lukes from the 70s. And it was a lot of fun steaming up the Mississippi, in which Luke becomes involved in a steamboat race up the Mississippi between really nice, kind riverboat captain. I don't think there were any kind riverboat captains, and another guy who's a bit of a rodder who cheats every step of the way. What was interesting about this is it was done in the 70s, and Cinebook, when they republished it in an excellent English translation, which is not here. I think this is German. So they did an excellent translation, but they felt a need to write an introduction to the beginning, as we see it so often in entertainment that's represented from the past. And they talked about some of the unfortunate racial stereotypes that show up in the story, particularly portraying African Americans as shiftless and lazy. Um, and I usually don't like these kind of things, these, apologies for what you're about to read, but they did print it, and they did print it without censoring it, without making any changes. And the other thing is it was a deftly worded apology that I think took into account the original creators and their intent, in which they made clear that neither Goscinny nor Morris were racially insensitive. They were having fun with the stereotypes of as presented in Hollywood movies. And Lucky Luke, in the end, is a Western parody. It's a parody of Hollywood Westerns, particularly of the 40s and 50s. And and so Goscinny and Morris were having fun with the kind of stereotypes that would appear in films from that period. And when you read the book, you realize, yeah, I mean, it's just a gentle mockery of that. Of course, it is at the expense of African Americans, but it wasn't meant to be about Africa. It was meant to be make fun of the movies and their portrayals. And but it's a good story. It's a ripping yarn, and as you can see, they feature characters from the movies. This character obviously based on James Coburn. And I had a good time with it. Thank you to Cinebooks for bringing this work to us in English for the first time. Lucky Luke, or as my good buddy Jean-Francois calls it, Lukey Luke. Oh, now a little bit off the beaten path. A relative of in my family, well, obviously a relative in my family, died recently, passed recently. And my sister was going through his belongings and came across a Peter Arno cartoon rough drawn on the back of a restaurant menu. And she called me and said, is this worth anything? And I said, yes, it is. Yes, it is. And so it made me go back and, go into the other room, into my library, and pull down a few Peter Arno books to take a look at. In particular, Peter Arno's Ladies and Gentlemen, which is, I think, published 1948, 1949, somewhere around there. If you're not familiar with Peter Arno, well, it turns out you really are. Even if you don't know who Peter Arno is, Peter Arno has had an effect on the pop culture and in his area of expertise in general. Before Peter Arno, magazine cartoons, and Arno writes about this in the introduction to this book, he was a spot cartoonist. He worked in magazines, New Yorker primarily. Before Peter Arno, this is the kind of magazine cartoon you would get. It would be this illustration, kind of funny or odd goings on, and you would have an exchange between two characters. Sometimes it'd be an exchange of 2 lines, sometimes 3. And the best I can say is these would be droll. They weren't laugh out loud funny. They weren't hysterically funny. They were droll or ironic or whatever. And Arno, he broke that formula. He invented, for all intents and purposes, and developed the one-liner, the spot cartoon with one line. And what Arno relates in the introduction of the story was, in the early days of magazine cartooning, you would do a funny drawing, what you thought was a funny drawing, and the editors would supply the captions. So the cartoonist didn't supply the captions, and so often the captions and the art didn't necessarily directly relate to one another. And Peter Arno brought that to an end. And now he did drawings with a specific caption in mind, a specific gag in mind, so that there was the gag and the picture were inseparable. One did not work without the other. And he was enormously successful. And of course, other cartoonists and the magazine publishing interests as well began to copy this format of the spot cartoon with one line to describe the gag. And these things they're funny. They some of these cartoons are almost 100 years old, and they're still laugh out loud funny. And I was surprised. I hadn't looked at Arno's work in a while. I was surprised that these cartoons from the 20s and 30s, how racy they were. Very subtle, very nuanced Air Force jokes. The kids could read them and not understand them. But, implying, a lot of hanky panky. But he's just the master. The stuff was really funny. And whether you've ever heard of Peter Arno or not, he added a phrase, a common phrase used all the time, to the point where people don't even realize it had an origin. And this was from a classic cartoon in which the caption was, well, back to the old drawing board. And that was Peter Arno. That's what he came up with that. And it was his cartoons in both the New Yorker and in collections were so popular that this phrase, well, back to the old drawing board, simply entered the parlance, as a synonym for, well, we screwed up again. So, but my favorite of all the Arno jokes is this one, an American couple driving by through a desert country by a man, obviously a Muslim in prayer. And the driver says, "Hey, Jack, which way to Mecca?" There's so many layers of that I find funny. But that was Peter Arno. So, hey, you want to contact me? You have questions, suggestions. Maybe there's a comic you think I should read and review. Maybe you got a picture of your kitty cat or your doggy we can put up. Please contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. You can ask questions below, and there will be links to everything I talked about below. But the most direct way, the one way I'm never going to miss you is if you go to brunobookstore@gmail.com. And while I got you, got a new project out. It's Rambo First Kill. It's a brand new graphic novel. And it is from Splatto Comics, your boy Zach. It's plotline by Sylvester Stallone and myself, script by me. And this is a straight up war action story. It takes Rambo from as a high school student in Arizona to the jungles of Vietnam for his first tour with the Army. And as you can see, the artwork is jaw-dropping. It's just gorgeous throughout. We have a great team of artists. Matt Barr, Butch Geis, Aaron Afflesh. Just terrific stuff. And it was a lot of fun for me to write, get back into the Vietnam thing. I was surprised at how readily I remembered phraseology and things like that. And for fans of mine who like my war comics and particularly like the book The Nam, all the events, all the combat events in this story are based on stories told to me by vets. And for the most part, they come from stories that vets told me while I was writing the comic book The Nam, but they were not stories that would have passed the comics code. And so they are presented here. So a lot of these things that John Rambo experiences in this story are things directly told to me by the guys who experienced them. And all the artwork is done. It's being colored right now. It'll be going to press soon. You can support it on Kickstarter. We've already, made our nut on it. So it's all going to get done, and it is currently in demand. You can buy it in demand. The campaign for it only ran 3 days, and we did terrifically well. I should also mention that Will Jordan, probably known to you as the Critical Drinker, has written a bonus comic to go along with this about Major Troutman and his experiences as a young soldier in Korea. So that's kind of a bonus comic that you can buy as part of a package with the First Kill graphic novel. This work will be in color, although everyone's saying that we should have an artist edition in black and white down the road, because this stuff is just gorgeous, gorgeous artwork. So that's it for me this week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for liking. Thanks for helping me spread the word. And I'll see everybody, every one of you. I hope I will see you down the road.